Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Var Hagen Sector, the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Alakatha is a resort planet and Vogel 7 had an Imperial Academy. These both sound like places important enough to have real stories on them, but they don't. Planet Vondark kind of has a story. It was where Imperial Admiral Sandar Del Vardis got his hands on a bunch of AT-ATs and invented the title Superior General for himself. But he took his new army to Iriadu. He was related to the Tarkans by marriage, so he hijacked 18th Night Hammer Command to establish the Iriadu Authority. We're talking about 17th Chrome Shield, so that's a story for another time. There's a more interesting story about Vondark, but it isn't actually about Vondark. See, Vondark was one of the targets of the Unification campaigns at the very beginning of the High Republic era. In the last century of the Old Republic era, the galaxy completely collapsed into chaos. It was every sector and sometimes every planet for themselves, with lots of feudal warlords and military dictatorships popping up from the Inner Rim outwards. Lots of systems still called themselves members of the Republic, but the Senate was basically empty, so what they really meant by calling themselves Republic systems is that they were part of a loose coalition against the Sith. The Sith, likewise, called themselves the Sith Empire, but there was no actual Sith Emperor, and the Sith was only a loose coalition of dark side aristocrats. Republic systems fought each other a lot in this era, but only when there were no Sith forces anywhere nearby. Anytime the Sith were around to present a common enemy, Republic forces pretty consistently put their differences aside to fight the Sith. The Sith were much worse at this, which is why the Republic tended to gain more ground over time than the Sith, and ultimately the Republic won the century-long war. At the end of the war, the Core Worlds, which had maintained most of the actual legal structure of the Republic in the core, re-established actual Republic rule throughout the galaxy, and this ushered in the Golden Age of the High Republic, which began with the Unification campaigns. The Ruusan Reformation officially disbanded all Republic military forces, but they retained a bunch of starfighters and some light infantry security forces. They didn't have tanks or artillery, so the Reformation was a genuine reduction in military forces, but it was not the total abolition of military forces that it's often portrayed as. The so-called judicial forces still had snub fighters with missiles and proton torpedoes, still had blaster rifles and thermal detonators and sniper rifles, and while I can't find confirmation on this one way or another, I'm pretty sure they even had mortars and rocket launchers. Certainly they had strong enough weaponry to forcibly reincorporate many of the warlords of the Dark Age back into the Republic, including at Vondark. These were planets that claimed to be part of the Republic in the Dark Age sense that they were part of the Anti-Sith Alliance, but tried to continue operating independently after the Republic Senate began to reassemble the Republic as an actual unified government, even if a heavily federalized one. Vondark isn't that far off from the Grumani sector ruled by the Sith during the Dark Age, so it's hard to imagine it didn't have some pretty hefty defenses, but the judicial forces were sufficiently equipped to forcibly reintegrate it into the Republic, so the judicial forces must have had some pretty heavy weapons. As the High Republic wore on, the judicial forces were steadily de-escalated, which leads to one especially weird anecdote. At one point, there was an effort to revive the judicial forces by commissioning the Katana fleet. It was a boondoggle that never delivered, but the fleet called for 200 heavy cruisers. That suggests that the judicial forces had a comparable number, if not many more, in the immediate aftermath of the Ruusan Reformation. At which point, I'm not totally convinced they didn't have tanks and artillery too, especially since they were able to conquer planets like Vondark. I suspect the Ruusan Reformation is mythologized as a decisive end to the Dark Age and a beginning of the High Republic, but it seems like the Reformation probably started out pretty aspirational and only became reality after centuries of peace made the maintenance of large military fleets seem like